The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, see everything we do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. Today we have a historic segment. Historic because this painter, this brilliant man, this sensitive guy, passed away a couple of years ago. It's called Mastering Street Scenes with the great Ken Auster. This is really a special piece. Enjoy it.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Ken Auster. I am here in Northeast Harbor outside of Acadia National Park, and we're here to do a little painting of a small, vibrant metropolis. Picked it because it's got a left side of a painting and a right side of a painting. I'm not real keen on doing paintings that are just one-sided, with the center of the street on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. I like to have a left-hand side. Buildings kind of frame things in, keep your eye closer to the center of interest, kind of keeps the eye inside the parameters of the canvas instead of going to the edges. And when I stop someplace to look to paint, I'm always trying to find the opportunity to create that three-dimensional world on that two-dimensional surface. And there's three ways to get the three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface, and that's perspective, form, and atmosphere. In a beautiful day like today, as the rain cleared out yesterday, you're going to have a lot less atmosphere, but as a painter, we'll put it in to give the illusion of depth. We have a great opportunity for perspective with the street going down, and we have a opportunity for form with the light hitting the sides of the buildings, and the winds blowing the bags all around will definitely give us a definition of depth as it flies by. First of all, as I briefly mentioned, and I'm back to a limited palette, I lay out colors. You know, I like to use a lot of paint, and so I'm not afraid to put the paint down. I use the classic oil colors, which are already pre-mixed. Every time I open a tube of this particular paint, the classic oils, it's exactly the same as it was the last time I opened up, whether it was a week ago, yesterday, or the paint that I used a year ago or 15 years ago. And the beauty of that is there's three things that in order to be a good painter you have to know or be aware of. And I don't think very many people talk about it, but there's three things that you have to be aware of. No matter how good you are as a painter and how much you know, you have to get all that information onto the canvas. And there's three things that allow you to get it on the canvas. Number one is the paint. You got to know the consistency and the opacity and the fluidity of the paint you're using. That's number one. Number two is you need to know the tools that you're using. You got to know what the right brush does with that paint. You have to know how stiff the bristles are on a certain brush or how flimsy they are on another brush. You got to know what your tools do. You got to know if you want to use your fingers, what they're capable of doing. If you want to use a leaf off of a tree, you have to be knowledgeable as to what that tool can do for you in a painting. So you have the paint, you have the tools, and then the last thing you need to have that you have under control is touch. You have to have the right touch with the right tool and the right paint. If any one of those things fail, you're not going to get your painting of what you know in your head and in your mind onto the canvas, because you may push too hard with the wrong brush, with the wrong fluidity of paint, and it won't happen. Many artists always say, I know what I wanted, but I couldn't get it on the canvas. I laid my brush down and it picked up a color underneath and I got mud. Well, my saying is that if you knew what you wanted and you didn't get it, that's your own fault. And the only reason that it happened is because you failed in one of those three areas. Your paint wasn't correct, your tool wasn't correct, or maybe you had a little bit too much Chardonnay the night before and your touch wasn't correct. One of those three things. So if one of those three things fails, you can fix all of them except for the touch. If the touch isn't right because of whatever reason, go work in the yard. Build a frame, make a panel. But if your touch isn't right, there's nothing that you can do at that moment. So those three things are very important. So when I lay my paint down, I make sure it's the same paint that I have every time I lay it down. Same consistency, same fluidity. I know what it's going to do, each color, anytime I want it, whether it's today, tomorrow, or a week from now, or if it was a year ago. I knew what it was and know what it's going to do. The panels I use generally are birch, ply, 1/8 inch. I sand them down. I apply an outdoor latex acrylic house paint to the outside of it, seal it. I can use a shellac over the top of that. But the idea is you have to seal the wood completely so that it doesn't allow any moisture to come into the panel, so that it doesn't expand or contract based on where the panel ends up going in different climates. You're in a moisture area where, like, you're near the ocean, a lot of humidity in the air, you paint on a canvas or a panel, and if the panel is then sent to Arizona for a show, it's very dry, panels can crack because the moisture is sucked out of it by the air. So make sure you cover your panel completely in a sarcophagus of paint, backside, sides, and front. No grain to be showing, and I like stiff areas to paint on. I don't like canvas as much. I like to be able to know how hard I'm pushing on the panel, and I know what it'll get with the tools and the paint and the touch. The brushes that I use are pretty much, they're kind of known in the industry. I have not that I am proud of it, but I have somewhat of a reputation as being a little sloppy. I have somewhat of a reputation as being someone who doesn't clean his brushes. I've had some of the best painters in the world come to my studio and tell me that I was the sloppiest painter they'd ever seen, and I kind of took it as a compliment in the sense that I teach my students that you need to be what you are. You can't change anything to try to be clean if you're messy. If you've never put the lid on your toothpaste at your house, you're not going to put lids on your paint and start now, because you'll fall right back into who you are, because that's who you are. And I tell people to build on that aspect of it. If you're really sloppy, there's something that you do that's a little different than somebody else, and you know what? You got to build on it. So my messy brushes, my floppy brushes, my brushes that have just sit in the paint, thinner, and if I travel they get a little bit hard because not all the paint's out of them. You know, these are pretty clean considering that I'm traveling with them, and but you can see that, you know, they have a character. They're starting to get their own little character, which is, and if you know your tools, you know what they're capable of doing. So with the tool, oh, and the last thing, for the sake of expediency, I use wax paper for my palette, which allows me to clean the palette really quickly at the end, because I just roll up the wax paper and throw it in the trash. And if I need a new palette or clean spot, I just rip off a piece of wax paper and lay it over the dirty palette, and I've got immediately a clean one. I don't have to spend any time. Everything that I do in painting is characterized by my kind of mantra of intellect and passion. And the intellectual part of painting is cleaning brushes and cleaning your palette and doing all the things that are necessary in a preparation part of painting. The passionate part of painting is pure passion and painting. Sometimes, if it's available, if I have a camera, I'll look through it. And I'll kind of get an idea as to what makes a good composition or design. And it kind of gives me a little bit of a bearing, because one of the things that's an illusion, and when people paint, they see things much larger in their mind than it really is. And so if they start to paint something, it'll appear bigger on the canvas than what it really is, and it's not really what they wanted to paint. People, you know, if they drive a car down a road and they see a little barn off in the distance, and they want to paint that little red barn, well, if the little red barn is painted too large on the canvas, then all the things around that little red barn don't appear. And if the little red things around the barn don't appear, it really isn't the reason why they wanted to paint it, because it's all those things like the rows of corn and the trees and the mountains that led your eye to that little red barn. So I'm always looking for things that will lead my eye to where I want the person to go to. And that's my ability as a painter. I can guide you through the painting. And I always tell my students, never jump through a painting. You can walk, you can slide, you can crawl, you can roll, you can do anything you want to, but never jump, which means that there's got to be a line, an imaginary line or an obvious line that takes you from every part of the canvas, from every edge, into the painting and to where you want them to go, which is the focal point, which is in focus, which is where the calligraphy is or the eye candy is, and the rest of the thing still maintains an abstraction. So with that said, I try to put this part of the painting on as thin as I possibly can. And if I put it on too thick, it won't work, because I don't sketch first before I paint. I like to just go right into it and start the painting. And if it's not what I want, I'll wipe it off. But if it is what I want, then I have it on there. And my problem my problem that I have with sketching something first is that sometimes the sketches have a real nice spontaneity to them, and that spontaneity doesn't exist when you try to copy that sketch onto a canvas, because spontaneity and sketching is passion, and copying the sketch onto the palette or onto the canvas is intellectual. And again, intellectual is more of a rendering, and sketching is more passionate. And what we want to do in the painting part or in the drawing part is try to maintain as much passion as we possibly can. And I'm just trying to lay out an idea for the roadmap. And again, with thin washes, and I want to also lay out where my focal point is going to be. And it's all about the composition and design of the painting. The stronger the composition, you know, a lot of great paintings and people who do really good paintings, they know the brush stroke, they got the color down, they can draw. But if it's a bad composition and design, it's going to be a bad painting. So I'm really hung up on trying to get the shapes down as best I can. Blocking in the areas trying to create the areas of masses. This is all would be considered the road map. A lot of times people ask me, why do I use black? I go, I thought you're not supposed to use black. And I always answer, if you're not supposed to use black, then why do they make it? And then people say, well, they make flesh tone too. And I say, well, I have a tube of that in my pocket, in my pack also. But the reality is that through history, a lot of artists have used black. Zorn being probably maybe the most obvious with a 3-color palette. Blacks, for me, are part of the building block. I get all my greens from black. And laying down a foundation or laying down a road map in black, when I put color on top of it, doesn't change the color that I'm putting down. Black will model the colors and darken them a little bit, but they won't change the color. But really the strongest argument for using black is that it makes all my greens. My warm greens are black and yellow, my cool greens are blue and yellow. And the harmony that I end up with using black to tie these grays together, because it does make things gray and knocks them back. It knocks the syrup out of the sweetness of a lot of colors. And more so in California than on the East Coast, we have a lot of atmosphere. And the reality is, I think that if you really were to really intellectualize what you're looking at, is that the whole world is pretty much shades of gray, whether it's gray greens and gray lavenders and gray blues. But anytime anything goes back into the distance, it's neutralized by the atmosphere in terms of losing its intensity, and therefore it has a tendency to wander, it grays out. And even if it isn't that way, or you don't see it that way, when I spoke earlier about creating a 3-dimensional world on a 2-dimensional surface, do that whether you see it or not. It's, look out your window and look at all the trees going back into the distance. You can't tell one tree from another, and therefore if you paint it the way you saw it, you'd end up with a bunch of trees that have no illusion of depth. But intellectually, if we figure it out ahead of time, we know that there's trees behind other trees. And how do you make trees look like they're behind other trees? You gray them out, you cool them off, you add a little blue, you add a little white, you add a grayness to the color as it diminishes it into the atmosphere. That gives you the illusion of depth, that gives you that three-dimensional world on the two-dimensional surface. And we do that whether we see it or not, because we paint what we know. If you use what you see and you try to paint it, you're going to end up with a flat painting or a very confusing painting. So we have to organize all of our thoughts, and we do that through before we start to paint, but those thoughts are also organized in your head with years and years of doing paintings, knowing that even though you see it, you push it back. Push it back. As it goes down the street, it's pushed back. As it ends off going off in the distance to the hills, it's pushed back. And it's pushed back by atmosphere. It's a crystal clear day today. There is no atmosphere, but in order to tell the story, I'm going to have to put it in. And I'm also going to put in maybe some trees that, or at least one tree that doesn't exist, only because I find that having things in context always seem to work a lot better in paintings. If you just have one tree in the distance, a person may not read it as a tree. If you have several trees and one in the middle ground, in the foreground, or in the background, and people will identify it easier as what they're, as to what it is. So sometimes even if I don't see things, I'll put them in order to tell the story. So at this particular point, I've pretty much kind of, I go through and double check a few things here and there, but I kind of understand from my roadmap where things are going to be. And, it's just a real basic shapes and forms. I'm not concerned about the details. I'm not going to try to, at this particular point of the game, put in the signage and windows. I mean, that's way too much information. I just want shapes. That's all I'm trying to do is simplify it down to the bare bones essence of what I'm looking at and not get too hung up and confused by all the information that's out there. And that's what happens when you paint the city. People just get hung up with all the details, and before you know it, they're rendering windows before they even have the shapes in. So at this point, I'm going to take out a big brush and try to fill in the canvas. Now this part of the painting, which I was just doing, which is the putting in all the putting in the shapes where the cars are going to be, and so on and so forth. This was all intellectual. This is like measure twice, cut once idea. If you're building a shelf or a bookcase, you measure everything out. You try to get everything where you think it's going to be in place, and measure twice, cut once. Now, with this part of the painting, what I want to do is just try to fill up the canvas as quickly as I can with the basic patterns of dark and light, but not get too hung up on the light, because there's so much stuff that's going to go on out there that I need to work on one side of the street to the other. Now, I have a warmer side of the street and I have a cooler side of the street. The side that I'm closest to, or the warmer side of the street, I can do it in two ways. I can either logically say to myself, okay, I'm closer to this side of the street. Anything that's closer to me is warmer, and so anything that's further away from me is cooler. So I can designate one side of the street as being a warmer side, and the other side of the street as being a cooler side. Closer to me, warmer; further away, cooler. That's an obvious. And then I have another way of doing it based on shadow and light. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a warmer side, and I pick out one animal at a time. This is what I do when I teach. I try to get people to understand that there's everything in a painting has a DNA to it, and the only thing that we're used to in DNA is animals. So we have asphalt as an animal, we have trees as an animal, we have bushes as an animal, we have buildings, wood as an animal. I mean, these are all animals, and the idea behind the animal is to teach people that things don't change as they go back in the distance. In other words, if you have an elephant in front of you, the DNA or the color that you would mix up to make that elephant is the same DNA that would make the elephant a mile away or half a mile away or up front right next to you. It's just that as they get further away, it gets lighter and cooler, and closer to you it gets warmer. So what I'm going to do is mix up an animal, so to speak, and I'm going to mix up the warmer, closest and the darkest one of the yellow bushes, and that would be right in here. And it comes down right there. Okay, we're okay right there. And I'll just put the little bit of a highlight side on it because, again, form is important. Okay, now I've got that animal. Now, on the other side of the street, we have, even though it's not there, we're putting in some of those same animals because I like to have the context of things going back in the distance. So what I'm going to do on the other side of the street is to mix up a blue and the yellow together. And on this side of the street, we have a cooler green because it's further away from us. And even though there isn't a tree there, I'm putting one, whether you like it or not. Because I just want to have, I want to incorporate some of this color over here, not just have it go off. Then I'm going to put another tree right there. A little bit further back in the distance. And then way back in the distance we have trees. And this is why I put these trees in here, is because way in the distance we have trees. And those trees way in the distance, you know, they're kind of dark. But as long as we make them blue, we can push them way back there. It still has the same DNA in these, mixed up out of the same puddle. So there is a identifying factor to these trees back here, in the sense that they all are mixed from the same puddle of paint. So when somebody sees something that's this color back there, they're going to recognize it as being a tree, even if it's just a brush stroke, because it consists of the same DNA or color that these other trees were. People always are able to understand paintings when the paintings have things in them that are in context. And when I say context, is that when you paint something that people understand on a daily basis, it's much easier for them to understand it if you paint it in a context. For instance, looking at cars on the street are easy to understand. But if there was a car with a trailer that had a boat on it, it would be difficult for you to understand the boat and the trailer because it's out of context. So it's much easier to paint loose and quickly with the context idea as opposed to putting in things that are really hard to understand and try to paint them so someone will understand. If you can't understand it visually and you can't explain it to somebody, you are not going to be able to paint it. Just added it down here. The orangey pink. Now I've got to go to the other side of the street, which is the cool side. Let's talk about the cool side and the warm side of the street. See, I have a different perspective on light, whether light is warm or cool. Um, Everything on the other side of the street is going to have more white in it because it's being lit. So once I get the basic color down, the other side of the street, though bathed in light, is a cooler side of the street. And when I say cooler side of the street, it's because there's nothing on the other side of the street that has less white in it than the side that I'm standing on. If I paint all of the shadows and all of the elements on the left-hand side, I have put very little white in that left-hand side of the street. On the right-hand side of the street, I'm going to be putting a lot of white paint into that. So emotionally, people can feel that the light is warm, but physically, the actual application of paint is going to be more white in the paint, and therefore more white in the paint, a cooler side of the street. That's totally the opposite of what people will tell you, but if you believe that the light hitting the sides of the buildings are warmer than the shadows, then you're going to continually try to add yellows and warm colors into those to try to make it warm. But if you just accept the fact that white is cold and that's a cooler side of the street, then you're not going to have to worry about making color that doesn't exist. It's confusing for a lot of people to try to think this way, but I feel it's more confusing to try to believe that adding white to anything makes it warmer. I think that's totally contrary to what and how we all paint and how we actually all see things. We've just been conditioned through life to believe that when light hits things, it's warmer. Physically, it is, but it's being filtered through a blue filter, the sky. So everything where light hits has a tendency to want to cool things off. The more light you have between what you're looking at and where you're standing is more atmosphere, the cooler it gets. The brighter something is. How do you make something brighter in light? You add white. If you're looking at the side of the building over there, the side of the building that you're looking at in shadow is warmer than the side of the building that's in light. Now, if somebody says that it's warmer in the light, let me ask you the logical question. What is the true color of anything? The true color of anything is that which it is in indirect light. It just confuses people. It confuses them because they believe that it's light and they have to make it lighter or warmer. They have to believe that people believe they have to make it warmer because it's in the sun. And in doing so, they add yellows and oranges to all of these things that they see, and they change the DNA of it. So in reality, what you end up with is not really what you're looking at. They're making up two different animals. And as I said earlier, you know, an elephant in the shadow is still an elephant. It's the same animal as it is in shadow as it is in sunlight. The only thing you're doing is adding white and maybe a reflective color of sky or a reflective color of earth underneath it when it comes into sunlight. But if I try to change the color of it based on the idea that it's warmer and try to make the highlight side of the elephant orange or yellow, you're going to be changing the DNA of the animal, and it's not going to be the same animal anymore. So I'm just going to try to work my blues and find the right values and work them back into the distance, not paying any attention to all of the actual structures that are going on in there. I can worry about those in a little while. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ken Auster. I am here in Northeast Harbor outside of Acadia National Park, and we're here to do a little painting of a small, vibrant metropolis. I try to put this part of the painting on as thin as I possibly can, and if I put it on too thick, it won't work because I don't sketch first before I paint. I like to just go right into it and start the painting. And if it's not what I want, I'll wipe it off. But if it is what I want, then I have it on there. And my problem my problem that I have with sketching something first is that sometimes the sketches have a real nice spontaneity to them, and that spontaneity doesn't exist when you try to copy that sketch onto a canvas, because spontaneity and sketching is passion, and copying the sketch onto the palette or onto the canvas is intellectual. And again, intellectual is more of a rendering, and sketching is more passionate. And what we want to do in the painting part or in the drawing part is try to maintain as much passion as we possibly can. What I'm trying to do when I paint brushes, I like to have the brush lead your eye in the direction that you want the person to go. If a street is going away from you, try to get the brushstroke to take your eye down the street. A lot of times I'll tell students to utilize in their mind the idea of a tennis ball and help use the paint as a sculptural tool as well as just filling in color. The oil paints allow you to create the illusion of sculpting. It has brushstroke to it. So it's always good if you can take the opportunity to put brushstroke into your paintings. Too many times artists put too many focal points in their painting. They want to put all the information. They want to develop it as much on the left side as they do the right side. And in doing so, the painting ends up not telling the viewer what it was that you really thought was the most important part of the painting. The goal, when I set out to start this painting, was to create something about this little town that was important to me as a painter. And putting all the information in that existed in the town as I saw it, I realized was not the important part. The most important part of this painting is to take you down the street with the reflection of the light, the atmosphere, the kind of eclectic storefronts which are not all the same, and to simplify it and make it so that it was something that was easily understood and that your eye could easily go to some place where I wanted you to go. So thanks for coming out and watching a brief demonstration of taking something that's complicated and trying to make it simple.
Now on DVD. To learn more, visit www.streamlineartvideo.com.
Well, that was a piece of mastering street scenes with the amazing Ken Auster. May he rest in peace. If you want to learn more about that video, you can find it at lilyartvideo.com, and there's a special discount code for you in the comments section today. Now, I did an interview with Ken, and it's a fabulous interview. I hope you enjoy it. So, tell me about this whole painter thing. What is it about it that that gets you up every day and makes you go paint instead of
Well,
whatever else you could have chosen?
Well, painting is pretty much my life in terms of what I do. And as an artist, as anybody who's in the arts or anybody who's really concerned or takes inventory of what they do and are proud of it or try to be proud of it and try to get better at it. We all live our lives around it, whether you're an actress or an actor or a musician or an attorney or anybody who really wants to be the best at what they do, not necessarily for the accolades that you get, but because it's a self-fulfillment and you're never satisfied with being where you're at. You always feel that you can do better. So it's something that your life evolves around. It's not 100% of my life. I mean, I try to incorporate a lot of things that I love in life and do them on a daily basis, but it's all centered around painting to some respect. I grew up at the ocean and lived my life practically up to my neck in salt water, and my life evolved around the ocean and ocean sports. But I always was an artist, but almost was a surfer first before I was an artist, because my life evolved around the beach. I couldn't go into the studio and paint unless I had gotten into the water that day, because I always felt anxiety, and that still exists today. Fortunately, I still have the stoke to want to get in the water, but in the art world, I'm able to control it in the sense that I can go into the studio or I can go on location wherever I'm at and fulfill the rest of my day with something that is not just fun, but actually is a profession. Being in the ocean is great, but it's not something that you can survive on and pay the bills. And to be able to fall back on something like painting or art, whether it's painting or anything in the arts, if it's stimulating that nerve and tickles you and makes you happy at the end of the day, like you fulfilled something that made you a better person, or you did something that made you better in your field that you really wanted to be better at, then each day was worthwhile. The days that you do bad paintings are not necessarily bad days. They're just days that you learned a little bit more. And it's not something that I planned. I never planned to be an artist. I just kind of was doing it as a child. And
so what how did that evolve? So
I mean, it was kind of a very circuitous route to where I'm at, but thinking back on it, and when I talk to people, it made a lot of sense. I didn't go to art school to be to become a painter. I went to a 4-year college, took the basics at Long Beach State, and I dabbled in the arts in that I took my illustration classes, and I did all these things, but I never really had a chosen profession. You know, I never really said, you know, I want to grow up and be a portrait painter. I want to grow up and be a landscape painter. I want to grow up and be a scene painter. You know, I never had time to do that because I was still having too much fun. You know, I hadn't grown up yet. I was, you know, surfing every day, doing my classes, and I tried to figure out a way in which I could incorporate art into making a living, you know, and for some reason I just stumbled on silk screening, and I ended up silk screening T-shirts for all the bars and fraternities at Long Beach State in the 60s, yeah, and I had a friend and I were going to go cross country in a big van, and we were going to silk screen fraternity Greek letters on everybody's T-shirts out of the back of the van and make a killing, you know, and drink beer at all the fraternity houses. And we were from California and tan, and at that time I had blonde hair, and we were going to kill it. We were going to go all across the country when surfing was just in its infancy, and print T-shirts and have a great time. And he ended up running away to Canada because it was during the Vietnam War. So there was half of my team left. I went to Hawaii and worked at Crazy Shirts when it started out in the mid '60s, and printed T-shirts and realized that, gosh, there was this guy in Hawaii that's printing a ton of T-shirts for tourists, and I go, this is not just for bars and fraternities, this is a big deal. I mean, you could actually have a business and make money silk screening T-shirts in your garage. And so I came back to California and started a company and screen printed T-shirts, and at one time pretty much printed all the shirts for every surf company and every surfboard manufacturer literally in the world. I had accounts in Europe, in Japan, Australia, all over the United States, and I try these people who were in the surf industry, who I had been looking at Surfer magazine and looking at their pictures, you know, the icons of surfing, you know, in the '60s. They became friends of mine because they wanted T-shirts, and I was the guy that was doing it. I was one of the first guys to print T-shirts for the surf industry back in the '60s, and before you know it, I'm traveling and hanging out with these guys and having a great time. And you know, I had a surfboard. I built a surf shop in Japan and traveled all around surfing with guys. And as I said, you know, surfing with people you read about in magazines in places that you dream about. And so it was great. And I came back to California and I got tired of silk screening shirts after a while. You know, I did a resort line in the Caribbean and traveled down there, and we hung out and surfed and met all the owners of the different resorts and designed for them. And always came back to Laguna Beach because it was a great place to come back to. And got hooked up and started doing, the surfing thing was first, the resort line was second, and then in the '80s I got hooked up because since I was one of the only people around in the infancy of the silkscreen industry, so to speak, and the birth of the surfing culture industry in the '80s. Somebody who had designed T-shirt art for Van Halen couldn't get it separated and put it on a T-shirt, and so they called me up and asked me if I could do it, and I basically saved the merchandiser's butt, you know, because he was about to get fired because he couldn't figure out how to get the artwork onto a black T-shirt, and I had figured it out because I was doing it myself. So he and I became close, and so I got caught up and became part of the '80 and '84 tours for Van Halen, in designing and printing their shirts for them. And so that was another avenue that just kind of happened. And so I came back after all that stuff, and through the '80s I was still designing, but I started dabbling in getting, I've always wanted to paint, and I was dabbling in it, but I was always busy silkscreening shirts at the same time, you know. So I had a business where I'd put on my silkscreen hat, and then I'd have in the afternoon or in the evening I would put on my painter's hat, and I'd play around. And then one day a bunch of guys and myself went out and said, hey, let's go painting outdoors, you know. And I had done it before when I'd been traveling, because when you travel you have your paints with you and you doodle, you know, with acrylics. But I had started messing around with some oils, and they all went out and painted on location.
Who were those guys?
Let's see, gosh, local guys. Jacobus Boss was one of them. Oh gosh, there's some basically Laguna guys.
Okay.
And they were painters who painted outdoors often, and I didn't paint outdoors very often, but I went out and painted with one day, and for some reason, and I don't know why, it just came easy. And you know, I always had a saying that, you know, fortune favors the prepared mind. You know, never just go blow it off. If something that you do or something happens that's easy, really for you, you just think about it for a while. So I sat back and started contemplating this whole outside deal, because I mean, I was painting outdoors, and they were really good paintings. And all the other people were struggling, you know, they're going, oh God, this is terrible. And I just went, you know, this is not bad, you know. And they're going, wow, you know, when did you do that? And so I started playing around with it, and then, you know, it was, I knew there was something there, but I hadn't found my voice yet. And so I kept struggling, and like every artist, I struggled, and I didn't know what I was doing. But
Do you still struggle?
no, I don't struggle anymore. No, I don't. And the reason I don't struggle anymore is because it's because I can say I can do really good paintings, and I can do okay paintings, but I don't do bad paintings. And the reason I don't do bad paintings is because they never get finished if they start out being bad. That's the main thing, is that you know a painting is going to be good or not in the first 15 or 20 minutes. And it's because it's all based on the foundation.
When do you know to let go?
First 15 or 20 minutes.
So you at that point you'll realize this is bad. You wipe it down. And,
you wipe it off.
yeah.
I don't do sketches before I go out. I don't. If I do a sketch, then the sketch sometimes can have the spontaneity and the fluidity, and then you have to copy the sketch over to the canvas, and then you're intellectually transferring something. It's not passionate. You know, it's not spontaneous. The thing about painting that I really enjoyed, as opposed to what I was doing previously in the silkscreen world, it was all preparation and cleanup, making screens, printing on paper, you know, layer after layer to get the image that you wanted. But the silkscreening part of what I did, starting out in t-shirts and then going to paper, basically from silkscreen to serigraphy, taught me shape and form. And
silkscreen's all about big shapes.
It's all about shapes and form. You can put split fonts on it and blend color, but in order to get form, you needed at least 3 values of the same color, dark, middle, and a light value. And so I learned to see those values, and I started making collages out of them. So I started out with silkscreen t-shirts, silkscreen paper. I ended up tearing up all my paper or printing big swaths of blended color onto paper, and then tearing them up and making collages out of them, and utilizing the blends of color to layering to get the feeling of things going back in the distance, seeing form. And I got very technical with collages, and over a period of time, going from those layers, all that stuff that you did was the foundation to the top block of the pyramid, which was painting. It all taught me, t-shirt designs taught me design and shape and form, graphics, composition, balance. Collages taught me form, how to see the 3 values immediately and to be able to separate them into simplicity, understanding that it doesn't take a lot of information to make something understood, that we as human beings, when we see something, if it's in context, it's much more easily understood as opposed to things that are out of context. And I discovered all this through collage. Then I started painting and taking it to the next level, and painting like I was collaging, you know, layers and very graphic shapes. And then the shapes got looser, and the edges got softer in some places and crisp in others. And then, as I say to students, you don't learn to paint in a nice, even contoured bell curve. Learning to paint comes in stages. You hit brick walls and then you climb them, and then you learn something and you level off, and then you hit another wall and you climb it and level off. That's why most artists really don't like what they do. And the reason why most artists don't like what they do is because their eye becomes more refined than their ability, even while they're painting. You know, as you're painting, you're learning. And so you may like what you're doing, and then all of a sudden you've learned something and you go, gosh, this isn't as good as it could be. Bingo, you hit a wall, you climb it, and you get to another level. And then you like what you're doing, and then bam, you don't like it. You hit another wall, you climb it, you start liking, and then you don't like it. Every good painter always has to not like what they do, because if they're not, there's no incentive to get better. If you like what you do all the time, then you know you're not going to get any better. So do I struggle? Yes, in the sense that I can do a bad painting, but it never gets finished. So I don't struggle in that respect. Generally speaking, I've done enough paintings and spent enough time out there to know what makes a good painting and what doesn't make a good painting. And so I don't start things that I know have inherent problems to them.
So what wisdom do you want to impart on somebody who might be watching this, who is trying to learn to paint, or who's trying to either make a career out of painting or just do it as a hobby? What do you think are the important lessons they need to be focusing on?
Well, the most important thing is to understand that not liking what you do is the catalyst to being a better painter. And
don't get comfortable.
Well, if you're truly have the desire to be a better painter, you're never going to be comfortable. But the rewards for getting better as a good painter are very small, and many times other people won't notice the reward. As you're a beginner painter, every single time you learn something, the reward is huge. You make huge steps in the beginning. But as you get better and better and better, the rewards are smaller, but you still sacrifice and still have the same kind of pain if you do something that's not right. You just try to eliminate those times when the things aren't right, and by picking subject matter that not necessarily subject matter, picking compositions and designs. My firm belief is that the most important part of painting is composition and design. And I think that by looking at history, the American Impressionists, who were by far, in my opinion, better drawers and executors of design than the French or any of the other Impressionist painters at the time. You know, I don't think that anybody could ever draw and design as well as Sargent. You know, so.
What painters that are gone now would you love to be able to sit with for 5 or 10 minutes?
Well, Sargent, Homer, and Hopper for sure. And then, you know, I mean, I would love to be able to get into the minds of some of these, the people, and just, I mean, you know, I just wondered if Sargent was savant, you know, and just the sense that, I mean, he was so good, and at what he did, and that it's almost to the point where he wasn't even human. And if you look at the sketches and the drawings and his ability to draw things from perspectives that were almost, you know, out of comprehension of looking at him, it's hard to understand that he could draw it. And there's a lot of, and there was a lot of people that I enjoyed their paintings. You know, I was attracted to the Ashcan School of Art with the Sloan and the Bellows, and the idea of painting subject matter that wasn't necessarily pretty, you know. And
but they sure made it beautiful, didn't they?
Well, they just used a lot of paint, and they had a lot of passion in their art. I mean, a lot of these painters weren't considered brilliant painters, but they were good, and they took chances. And they painted things that really documented, more importantly, the period of life which they had that wasn't all pretty. And I think that what I have found in my own pursuit of painting is that I'm attracted to the things that aren't going to be painted by everybody else. I often have a huge sigh in my mind of like, if we're going to some place where you know everybody else is going to be painting the same thing, because there's just, for me, there's no reason to.
Been done.
It's been done, and I think that in my life right now, that I think I want to spend more time in the intellectual part of painting before I start to paint. I want to think more about what I'm doing as opposed to just responding automatically to it. It's really easy to go and set up an easel and look at what you're going to paint and paint it, because it's sitting right there in front of you. You know, it's like setting up a still life. But there is more to painting, I believe, than just doing that. You know, there's an intellectual part that you could take something that exists, but you could change it in a way in which has another meaning to it, something deeper and more personal. And so I'm really trying to, in the backside of my life as a painter, you know, if there was a beginning part and a middle part and the backside of my life as a painter, I really want to spend more time thinking about what I'm going to paint and how I'm going to express myself and the imagery that I'm going to do, as opposed to just painting it because it's there.
So, how do you want to be remembered, or do you care?
I think that I've already cast I think it's already been cast, so to speak, in the sense that when I talk to people who I believe are informative of the area, they refer to me as one of the people, if not the person, who started bringing back the cityscape. I think that the response that I get from people who I respect in the art world, who know what they're talking about, you know, writers and directors of museums and things, they will say that I was somewhat responsible for people bringing back cityscape into the nomenclature. Prior to that, it was all landscape, and then immediately, as soon as I started painting red taillights in city cavernous San Francisco scenes, everybody started painting them. But they always say that you were the first.
Yeah.
And so I think that if there is going to be an asterisk after my name, other than being in the Encyclopedia of Surfing History,
and T-shirt history,
and as being one of the founders of the surfing industry T-shirts in the Encyclopedia of Surfing, if there is an encyclopedia of painters there for this period of time, it will be the person who started the movement towards painting cities again.
So when they're researching you 100 years from now and trying to find out every little detail, what's the one thing that they don't know that they need to know about you?
You know what? I'm pretty much of an open book. You know, there's not a lot about me that I haven't said to people already. I think that if there's one thing that is that I don't owe anybody any money.
And if I do it, I'm not talking about it.
Yeah, I don't owe anybody any money. That's the and I that what I have been doing has been an evolution and not a revolution. From silkscreening T-shirts to paper, to collage, to painting, to bringing intellect into the painting. I find painting easy. I find the intellectual part to be the stimulating part. Painting is just a process, but it's really the intellectual part that's starting to tickle me now.
Ken, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, that, of course, was the interview with Ken Auster. May he rest in peace. What a great man. What a great friend. We all miss him very much. Anyway, the video is phenomenal. If you want to learn how he saw things different and you want to learn how he painted, check it out at lilyartvideo.com. And remember, there's a special discount code in the comments section. Thanks for watching.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Ken Auster. I am here in Northeast Harbor outside of Acadia National Park, and we're here to do a little painting of a small, vibrant metropolis. I try to put this part of the painting on as thin as I possibly can, and if I put it on too thick, it won't work because I don't sketch first before I paint. I like to just go right into it and start the painting. And if it's not what I want, I'll wipe it off. But if it is what I want, then I have it on there. And my problem my problem that I have with sketching something first is that sometimes the sketches have a real nice spontaneity to them, and that spontaneity doesn't exist when you try to copy that sketch onto a canvas, because spontaneity and sketching is passion, and copying the sketch onto the palette or onto the canvas is intellectual. And again, intellectual is more of a rendering, and sketching is more passionate. And what we want to do in the painting part or in the drawing part is try to maintain as much passion as we possibly can. What I'm trying to do when I paint brushes, I like to have the brush lead your eye in the direction that you want the person to go. If a street is going away from you, try to get the brushstroke to take your eye down the street. A lot of times I'll tell students to utilize in their mind the idea of a tennis ball and help use the paint as a sculptural tool as well as just filling in color. The oil paints allow you to create the illusion of sculpting. It has brushstroke to it. So it's always good if you can take the opportunity to put brushstroke into your paintings. Too many times artists put too many focal points in their painting. They want to put all the information. They want to develop it as much on the left side as they do the right side. And in doing so, the painting ends up not telling the viewer what it was that you really thought was the most important part of the painting. The goal, when I set out to start this painting, was to create something about this little town that was important to me as a painter. And putting all the information in that existed in the town as I saw it, I realized was not the important part. The most important part of this painting is to take you down the street with the reflection of the light, the atmosphere, the kind of eclectic storefronts which are not all the same, and to simplify it and make it so that it was something that was easily understood and that your eye could easily go to some place where I wanted you to go. So thanks for coming out and watching a brief demonstration of taking something that's complicated and trying to make it simple.
Now on DVD. To learn more, visit www.streamline.com.